So, welcome to our monthly Goleta community meeting with regard to homelessness throughout the city of Goleta as well as the region. This is a partnership with the city of Goleta as a part of our broader South County efforts to address homelessness kind of on a big picture scale. And so, I'm Landon Rank. I'm the director of programs at SB Act and joined by Chuck Flax, homelessness services coordinator with the city, as well as Councilmember Stuart Kasdan. Thank you for being here, and other city staff. I wanted to just note before we start, and Chuck, maybe I'm stealing your thunder, so I apologize if so, but I'm going to just pull up the City of Goleta's website for anybody who might be new to this discussion topic, or anyone watching the recording as well. Just to note all the resources that are currently within the City of Goleta. You'll find the homelessness services page has quite a bit about what the city is doing, the current strategic plan, as well as different resources within the city of Goleta, who to call for different kinds of homelessness related needs. And we encourage you to utilize this page. It also has Chuck's contact information if you should see or have any homelessness concerns arise. And then as regards this group specifically, we meet once a month, typically on the fourth Monday, but the fourth Monday of this month happened to be Memorial Day. But that schedule will continue next month. And so our next meeting will be on the fourth Monday of June, which is the 22nd of June. And I'll pull that up at the end of the meeting. So with all that having been said, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to share some updates from the city.
Thank you, Landon. Loading my screen here. So we also at these monthly meetings present the data that is currently available to us from our homelessness management information system, as well as our tireless outreach folks, some of whom are on the call. And we always want to make sure that we're keeping track. What I do is every month I go through all of the people that are connected with Goleta and determine where they're located and what their needs are. So this is data from the month of April. You can see over the last quarter that things have stayed relatively consistent. So the big blue bar is the total number of people that we know about who are homeless in Goleta. The dark blue bar is encampments, the orange bar is people in shelters, and the green bar are people in vehicles. Looking at the trend over the last year, the last 12 calendar months, we see that we've cut the number of homeless people in half. And what that reflects, I believe, are two things. One is there is some mobility of people who are leaving the Goleta area. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've stopped their homelessness, although we have seen some turnover in the shelters. And so people are going to shelter, people are going to housing. Patterson Point opened up. There was a project downtown that opened up or is in the process of opening. So we're seeing in downtown Santa Barbara. So we're seeing some movement, which is great. But the issue, as we know, is vehicles. I'll talk about that in a second. Overall, the picture is a little less rosy than I painted it with that other graph, because this is what they call the flow: people coming into homeless versus people being housed. And the blue bar are new people encountered. So we hit some low months, but this past month in April, there were 12 new people that we identified and only one person housed. So April was not a good month in terms of our flow. And overall, this is pretty common around the country, and it's definitely true for the county that for every for every one person we house, 48, we encounter two more people who are experiencing homelessness. So it's a ongoing challenging thing that we work on. Just in terms of some special populations, we keep track of these for a couple of reasons. One is that HUD, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, identifies these special populations as priority populations. And so there are some additional resources available for them. So in the case of seniors, this is actually our largest special group, 34 out of 86, so that's 40%. We have two transition age youth that are they're unsheltered. It's a little complicated. We have a homeless long-term transitional housing facility in Goleta, and so we do refer people there. This is for the transition age youth. They can't stay there forever, but given that they can stay there 2 years, I don't consider them homeless anymore. But two are still out there, and the good news is that there's a lot of services for youth and a lot of referrals to the agencies. So our hope, we always try to get young people off the streets as fast as we can. And then thankfully, we have not seen any new veteran homelessness in Goleta. In terms of chronic homelessness, this is the definition of chronically homeless, if you're wondering. Um, Goleta has a disproportionately large number of chronically homeless people compared to other parts of the state. The sort of average number in any given location is usually around 30% or fewer. But 61% of our population who are homeless identify as chronically homeless, which makes it's more of a challenge to get people who are chronically homeless housed. This is I call this the council member Kasdan slide. You specifically asked for this as the overlap between chronically homeless people and seniors. That overlap is 23 people. It represents, of the seniors who are experiencing homelessness, 66% are chronically homeless. And then of the chronically homeless, 44% are seniors. So a good way to look at that is with a Venn diagram. So that's what we have here. And then finally, this is not something that fluctuates very much. But the good news that I was referenced on this slide is that the majority of people in Goleta have income. They either have disability income, retirement income, or they have earned income. And so one of our priorities, and it's really going to be the priority of both state and federal funding, is to increase income as much as possible. So we are working with our outreach providers and with the county to really make sure that we're keeping track of things. Because I know that some of the folks that are employed on our list are not, their income isn't being reflected. One is driving for Uber, one is working at a restaurant. So that hopefully we'll get that information into our system. So that's my data presentation. Are there any questions?
I guess I would.
Yeah.
This is the HMIS system data primarily, is that right? So in other words, what gets confusing sometimes is, it'll show, I don't know, 80 people homeless, but we know that doesn't reflect the most of the vehicular homeless, right?
Right.
That there's a large, so ideally, it seems that if we were presenting this, we would have a bar that is unidentified or some for a lot of these categories because it gets, sometimes it shows it as if there's 80 people, sometimes it shows, and there's just a big chunk that we don't know if they're veterans, if they're seniors, if they're young, if they're old. We just know we don't have data on them, but we know there's a presence. And just for future slides, I would think it might make it clearer that there's this additional population. We just don't have data.
So Councilman Caston, you'll remember that throughout 2025, I was presenting vehicle data. And we had New Beginnings doing a fairly regular count of people who were in vehicles. And I was pulling that information from a mapping program called Fulcrum that we had available to us. The county has shifted from Fulcrum to using geographic data in HMIS, and they've been slow to roll that out.
I see.
And so the HMIS vehicle data that New Beginnings is capturing is not available yet. When it is available, I'll present a map that shows clearly, where people are and where we've identified vehicles that are inhabited. So we just don't have that data yet.
Okay. Well, I guess I would say in order to reconcile, so I appreciate that. And I think that'll be a valuable contribution. It's just, even if we know there's a population and we don't have data, it would help just to have a bar that says, we have this number of vehicles, we have no data on them. We don't know their composition.
We don't know the number. We don't even know the number. The number
Oh,
fluctuates every night. I mean, it's one of the benefits of having New Beginnings in the field is that they do keep track. That funding is limited, but I want to take every advantage of it to so that we can keep an accurate count. But we currently don't have that ability to have an accurate count reflected because of how HMIS is going through this transition. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to figure out
okay.
the right way to capture the data. And if I believe pretty strongly that once that ability comes back, that we'll have very good analysis.
Okay. We can discuss it then.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm,
Chuck, would you scroll down to the very last slide about the income sources?
mhm.
I was just going to give this is kind of as a teaser for the forthcoming vehicular homelessness study. We saw some of the preliminary findings at the COC board meeting last week, and in that last pie chart, the proportions were somewhat similar, fairly similar for people living in their vehicles in terms of where their sources of income uh, were coming from. And within earned income, they noted that the highest proportions of individuals were working within the hospitality, service, and domestic sectors. Um, so I just think it's of note, especially thinking of hospitality as one of our biggest industries in Santa Barbara County, um, that many of the people living in their vehicles are those who are working within that industry. And so I think as we start trying to come up with solutions, it's just worth noting that that's an industry that we're very, we care a lot about in this community, and we're going to need to figure out how we can make it sustainable, including caring for those who work within it.
That's a great point. And did you get slides from that presentation, or did you just quickly note things down when they were presenting?
I just noted some things down. I
Okay.
did take screenshots, but I don't feel like I should be the one to share them.
Yeah, no,
So
I'm waiting for them to make it public.
So, and this is all homeless, both chronic and non-chronic, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because I mean, it certainly is interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, I guess I wonder, how much if we were looking at this data for the recently homeless, the chronic homeless, is there a big difference? It would change a lot of people's perception, I would think, mine, of if the chronic homeless are actually working.
Yeah, I can do some analysis on that of that specifically.
Thanks.
anything else for Chuck? All right. Thank you, Chuck.
Absolutely.
Okay. So for our main topic today, we wanted to dive into really what it takes to get from uh, experiencing homelessness to permanent housing. I think most of us on this call know already that this is a very long and complicated process, unfortunately. But we do want to try and demystify it a little bit for those who might be new. I may call on some of our service providers to share some stories as we go throughout this as well. Um, but part of the reason I'm going to be sharing about this is that SBAC has worked on this resource. It's the Journey to Housing brochure, which is available through the county's website. I'm putting the link in the chat window there that if it's of interest to you. But this is something that we try to hand out at the Faro Center whenever a client is coming in, just so they can get a sense of what the process will look like from start to finish. Um, and it's fairly broad because we want it to be applicable throughout all of Santa Barbara County. So we're going to work through a little bit of that brochure today, and specifically the section that's the roadmap. So you can see there's a few steps on this process that we've clarified here. Obviously, it's more nuanced than what's here, but we're going to go through some of these steps sort of one by one today. And just to be clear, when we're talking about this journey to housing, we're assuming the person is starting from already experiencing homelessness. So they are on the streets, they are living in their car, they are living in a shelter, whatever it might be. There's different processes. I'm sorry about that. For those who are maybe afraid they're going to lose their housing in the near future, and we'll talk briefly about those. But the main thrust of today is for someone who is already experiencing homelessness. So on a whole, the first step is really to enter the system. And when we talk about the system, we're talking about the coordinated entry system. This is a term that gets thrown out a lot on these homelessness calls. And it can be a little confusing if you're not working in the homelessness world. But the general idea of the coordinated entry system is that someone could show up to any of a number of sites throughout Santa Barbara County that have been designated. They can show up, they can present themselves, they can say, hey, I'm experiencing homelessness. And the staff at that site will help them to get entered into the database and then prioritized and figured out what's the best pathway to housing for you. So you can see on the left, it's just kind of a general concept of what it looks like in a community without coordinated entry system, that you're kind of forced to do it all individually. And really it can be a maze because every type of housing is different and has different requirements. Whereas if we have this coordinated entry system, someone can come in at any of those different access points at the, like you see at the bottom. They can get assessed and then they get channeled through to the correct pathway for that individual, ideally, of course. So you'll see back on this map that the first step is to enter the system. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about sending that person to go to one of our coordinated entry sites in Santa Barbara County. Now, there are physical sites. There are also just the outreach teams can also enter someone into the system. And so if they come across an outreach staff member, let's say like at the luncheon that happens in Isla Vista, that can also be a way to enter the system. But for our purposes today, I wanted to just mention the actual list of sites because that's an easy reference for most of us in the community. If you see someone who's experiencing homelessness, you can direct them to one of these sites. The link is the same link that I had shared already in the chat window, but you can view the full list of sites throughout Santa Barbara County there. And then I'm just going to show on the map what are some of those South County sites. So you can see the hours are limited, but there are a few sites in Isla Vista and Goleta. Within Goleta, or just outside of Goleta, I'll say, is St. Athanasius Church. So on Thursdays during the Showers of Blessing program, someone can enter the coordinated entry system. And then in Isla Vista, we've got the Isla Vista Community Center on Fridays and the St. George Youth Center, specifically for youth aged 18 to 24 on Thursday mornings. And then there's quite a few more within the city of Santa Barbara. You can see the Father Virgil Cordano Day Center up in the top left corner, which is pretty close to the city limits there. And they're open Monday to Thursday, 9 to 12. I've noted several other sites on here. I will note again, the Faro Center is another Monday to Friday site. And then for youth, Monday to Saturday at the YMCA's Haley Street Navigation Center. So these are some of the ways that someone could get into the coordinated entry system. As I mentioned, they can also just connect with an outreach worker. And there are various ways to do that throughout the city, as well as the fact that the outreach workers are trying to go to them. They're actively going to sites where we know encampments are or people might be to try to find them. So there's more than one way to get into the coordinated entry system. So once they get to that coordinated entry system, they move on to step 2, which is they need to connect with an access point staff member or a caseworker. So just because they go to, let's say, the Showers of Blessing program at St. Athanasius does not mean they will get into the coordinated entry system. We want to make sure and send them to look for either CityNet or Good Samaritan or AmeriCorps or YMCA staff, one of the agencies that specifically helps with housing navigation. Once they do connect with that person at the coordinated entry site, that staff member is going to guide them through a few different steps of screening. They're going to check and see, is this person currently homeless, or is this more of a situation where it's a prevention situation? Is this person fleeing domestic violence, in which case we need to get them into more of an emergency shelter type situation? Is this more of a diversion case where it's somebody who maybe they just became homeless recently, so we can quickly help get them back into housing? And if not, if it's more of a, hey, I've been experiencing homelessness for some time, then we would actually move forward. Hey, let's get you assessed and into the system. So at this point, we would move on to number three, which is actually completing a housing needs assessment. And I invited Ellen to share just briefly about this process. I wanted to put on the screen just some of the questions that are a part of the actual intake for the coordinated entry system. You can see it's fairly personal questions. There's a lot that we want to know so that we can figure out how to direct someone. Um, and so I wanted to just have Ellen share briefly about what that process is like. And Ellen, if you don't mind sharing kind of what's the length of time that this typically takes, or like what's a range of time this typically takes?
Um, it really depends. I have been doing this for 4 years, so I kind of have it memorized at this point. So it's a little bit, we can get through it pretty efficiently. I like to make sure we have at least like 20 minutes to set aside for it because we're doing both the CES intake. So we're asking these questions. And then alongside that, to be in CES, you have to do a vulnerability assessment, which we call the VI SPIDAT or the VI. And those go into some pretty personal questions as well. Oh yeah, I didn't introduce myself. Sorry. My name's Ellen Antonioli. I've been the CityNet outreach worker for Goleta for about 4 years now. And we are hiring for my partner if you know anyone interested. But yeah, I typically, like if I know I'm going to be doing a CES intake with the vulnerability index, I like to make sure that we have 15 to 20 minutes at least, and I can kind of pull the client aside and it's not the middle of like a busy, either like a showers of blessing kind of event or at their campsite. I want to make sure we have like this proper space and time to do it.
And Ellen, can you talk about what are some of the obstacles that come up when you're trying to do the actual intake assessment?
Sometimes people are uncomfortable with the questions, which I definitely understand. You know, it's asking about like medical history, it's asking about domestic violence history, why they became homeless, stuff like that. Um, so they have the ability to refuse to answer the question, but that sometimes is at the detriment of them processing through the system. And it also creates like data errors, which get reported back to the county. That's an issue. We also have a lot of issues with people just not wanting to disclose disabilities because they feel that that will be used against them. We also have some people just don't remember. I've met people that don't know their social, they don't know their birthday, they don't know where they're from, they don't know how they got here. So sometimes we have to kind of sit and figure that out.
Ellen, how do you answer the question, how is this going to get me housing?
Um, I normally tell them I manage expectations. I tell them, you know, housing is difficult out here, but this is the first step to get the ball rolling. I tell the best way to explain it is that there's different ways to get housing, but when they pull housing for certain subsidized housing, they're pulling people out of a giant pool. And if you want to be in this pool and have the chance to get pulled, you have to be in this system to enter the pool. And then you have to get your documents together and uploaded to be in that eligible pool.
I like that. We're not going to let you in the pool without a swimsuit.
Yeah. I'm like, they need, if they don't know you're experiencing homelessness, they can't select you for housing. So we have to at least put you in the system so that the county knows that you're here and you're seeking housing and this is your situation and you're interested in being pulled for subsidized housing.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, and with this data, then the county is able to work with all the outreach staff like Ellen, like Destiny, like others that are on this call, and to sort of coordinate everyone to decide the prioritization of different individuals for different kinds of housing. There's different opportunities for those who are veterans, different opportunities for those who have disabilities, et cetera. And so all of these questions are then fed into making those determinations of where individuals might be able to apply. So the next step we have on here, I'm really oversimplifying the process, of course, but the next step is to try and obtain ID and other documents. In many cases, we have a lot of individuals that are experiencing homelessness and have very, very little with them in terms of the important documentation they actually need to get into housing. You can see on the right side the list that is within our countywide database, where we sort of check off all the different things that we try to collect from people, and scan them into the system so that they can then be used as people are applying for housing. Not all of these are required. You can see the very first thing on the list is the chronic homelessness verification form. And if someone is not actually chronically homeless by that definition that Chuck gave earlier, then they wouldn't need that. Similarly, at the bottom, there's a question about whether it's a family. If it is a family, there might be more documentation that's needed, but if not, then it's left as it is. But this part takes a long time. In some cases, like Ellen mentioned, someone not having a social security card. We have someone who doesn't have a birth certificate, and wasn't even aware of their own social security number. And so they were really starting from zero, and having to call out of county to try and get these documents for an individual with no legal identity. Um, and then in other cases, one of these documents will be needed in order to get the others. Um, so I don't know if any of our outreach workers on the call can just share about any stories of trying to get documentation or any challenges that may have arisen for you. But I'd love to hear from somebody either from Good Sam or Safe Parking, just about kind of what this is like. I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Hi, this is Cora, everybody. It's it goes fairly well, and what's nice too is that if you need birth certificates, if you're experiencing homelessness, you can get them for free in California, and so that's helpful for our people to know.
We have a question from Stuart. How much of this process is dictated by federal or state law? It's a good question. I know some of this is just you have to do some of these things like you would for any type of housing. You have to have the right documentation for this. But in terms of how our particular county operates, we do have to have a coordinated entry system. That is one of our requirements. But I'm not sure how much of the specifics within that are mandated.
So it's pretty circumscribed. The federal government determines what the data is. The state follows up and is also tracking all this information. I don't remember whether there's any state specific requirements here, but all the fields are dictated primarily by the fact that we're trying to get funding from the federal and state governments to support these folks. And it does make our jobs harder to have to go this deep into people's personal lives. But it is required. So yes, it's a good question, council member.
Thank you. So in other words, if anyone's wondering, boy, that seems like a lot that we're requesting, we have very little flexibility in streamlining or doing other things that would simplify it.
So the way we work, and in this case, the people that are here are representing primarily outreach programs, although Cora has direct relationship with the equivalent of a shelter and our safe parking programs. But the way we manage this historically and currently is if someone is on the street in an encampment and they don't trust people and they're not ready to give out all this kind of information, we can still get people into shelter. Well, it used to be easier. I was going to say they can go into a shelter and then start to fill this stuff out. But I also just realized that it's really hard to get someone into shelter without being in the coordinated entry system. So maybe Ellen can back me up here. What's the minimum that someone needs to get into a shelter?
It gets a little convoluted.
Yeah.
We have a lot of different shelters and they all operate differently. And it is confusing. There's what's considered like lower barrier entry shelters, like something like Mercy House, which is the one Santa Barbara on Cassique. That is one where you wouldn't necessarily need to be in the system to enter, but you would have to move forward for case management and like documentation. For something like the tiny homes, which are the more highly desired shelters, you need to be in the system. You need to meet a certain criteria of location, sometimes criteria of previous enrollment. You have to be brought up in a meeting with different service providers using your personal ID number connected to the system to be like vouched for. There's some shelters where to get in, you have to have been enrolled in a specific outreach program, which ran about 3 years ago, and they have to have the history in the system. I would say it's rare for me now to get someone in that's not in CES. They don't have to be active, but they have to have a profile created, and then we'll put them back into the active category.
And the good news here is that if someone is relatively new to homelessness, if we can get them to contact the county's problem-solving hotline, we may be able to keep them out of the homeless serving system and out of CES entirely. So that's the kind of effort that we're starting to put more and more resources into, because this is a very difficult thing to get people through. We're trying to figure out ways to resolve people's homelessness up front. So thank you for that, Ellen.
So then continuing to move forward, there are further steps around the person's status as someone experiencing homelessness does need to be confirmed by a staff member. There may be different steps for those living in their vehicles as well. So once again, I am very broadly generalizing. And then similar to how Ellen was describing, there's nuances for different types of settings. You'll see over on the left side, we noted that substance use recovery or detox may be a part of the steps, but is not always. It just sort of depends on what pathway to housing the individual is on. So these are the general steps. I have a few more slides to talk about here, but I did just want to note, you can see with all of these steps, it's a complicated process. And so there's a lot that can fall through the cracks in each part of the process. Any number of things can happen. Let's say the person loses access to their phone. Their phone is stolen. Their case manager is no longer able to get a hold of them. They're not able to keep working with them to obtain documentation. Other issues could be individuals living on the streets don't have a permanent address and may not be able to receive mail to a PO box for any number of reasons. So getting the ID and documents is going to then force them to rely on an agency, or like the Father Virgil Center will accept mail for clients. But that can, again, have some complicating factors. Other issues, Chuck mentioned trust. This is a long process, and it really helps to have that relationship of trust with a case manager. So what happens when that case manager maybe gets a new job or leaves their current organization? That person has to build trust with a whole new staff member that they haven't been working with on this process. So there's a lot of complicating factors as you go through this that can all lead to somebody either, hopefully getting in where they want to go, but it can also lead to someone falling out of the system and maybe losing trust in the system altogether. And then I want to just name that the big kind of pink elephant with this all is the actual need for housing, is that you can go through all of these steps and then be stuck kind of at the very end of the road for a very long time. Hopefully you're able to get into interim housing, but then from there, the question of when you'll be able to get into permanent housing can be very tough. This is some out-of-date data. This is from 2024. This was the county's community action plan to address homelessness. And they had identified the actual gaps that we needed to fill in terms of beds or units throughout Santa Barbara County. So this is not specific to Goleta. And so you can see this includes permanent housing. It also includes interim housing, as well as rapid rehousing, which we're not really getting into today. In 2024, as of the 3 years into the county's community action plan, we were still less than halfway on the permanent housing goals, and a little over halfway on the interim housing goals. So you can still, the need is still really great. Not only is there not enough permanent housing, there aren't enough shelter beds for everyone in our entire county as well. So this is, as I said, out of date. This doesn't include some of the newer programs, such as Patterson Point, which just opened. I don't believe La Posada was included in this at the time. But even so, there's still a long way to go. And for that reason, we have people that end up kind of waiting at the end of the road for a long time in some cases. And again, that can be a factor as to why someone loses faith in the system and then begins to reject help or reject services because they say I've tried this and it got me nowhere. So I don't want to end on a totally bleak note with that, but I do just want to say this is tough and it's tricky. And we have some really cool people in our community that are working on this. And I see a question from Councilmember Kasdan.
Yeah.
What is the average wait for interim or permanent housing? I don't know if I know the answer to this. Chuck, do you, or should we go to our
Well, so I
outreach
think it
teams?
depends very much on a variety of things. First of all, those who are most interested in shelter are most likely to get it. That sounds obvious, but it's very hard given people's experiences being in and out of shelters, being in and out of jail, being, it's very hard to get someone to trust that this time we're going to be with you, we're going to make it happen for you. So a lot of the time it takes between being on the street and getting into a shelter can really be a function of people's individual histories. The other complicating factor is in South County, we have our shelters are now completely full, and it makes it almost impossible. Even if someone's willing, it can be very frustrating to try to get someone into shelters. So one of the things that I've identified, in our discussions about how to direct funding, is that we really do want the county to take more action to create more shelter opportunities, and that we know that shelters like La Posada and what they call Dignity Moves Downtown and Hope Village in Santa Maria are really good examples of shelter. But we have a shortage.
I mean, I would just say we're the city of Goleta. We have to figure out how to take care of our homeless and not hope that the county does it for us. They're not the ones who are going to do it. They have their own problems, and we need to figure out how to produce the housing, whether short term or long term, that'll answer the problems that we have. And I mean, I you, we could tell, the data I assume is there for different subgroups. If you want to say, one subgroup, let's say those who have been in prison or something, how long it takes them to get some form of housing, or those who are, recently homeless, once they enter the system, how long it takes. But it would be helpful to know the length of time it takes, because there's a fundamental problem. We can do all the outreach we want. If there's no, and collect all this information, if there's no housing, it's all just Sisyphean. They're just going through the motions of something. Ultimately, we need to have housing. Preaching to the choir, I know.
Well, and you've said a mouthful. The reason why I bring up the county is that the all of the funding to support shelter operations, with the exception of private donations, comes from the county. It's either directly from the county, which is small, or pass through from state and federal grants. And so the county decides how we prioritize funding and whether it goes to support shelter or permanent housing. So
I don't accept that. I don't
well,
accept that it's
that's
their
my
responsibility to find interim and permanent housing for us. It may be something on paper that they're doing, but if we want to make sure that our people get housed, we have to figure out how to do it.
so we in order to have housing and shelter, you need funding. And the city of Goleta provides a disproportionate amount of its own general fund to do outreach and to do navigation into housing. So from our perspective, from staff's perspective, and also, I mean, I think generally council feels this way, that we're doing as much as we can in the city of Goleta in terms of being able to create new opportunities. What needs to happen is so in order not to leave everybody feeling depleted and upset about this, I've been doing this for 11 years. The system before this, Gavin, or I'm sorry, Landon, if you could go back to the opening slides about CES. So this situation of without CES was where we were since the 1980s up through 2018. And what it was is if someone was homeless, we referred them to agencies, and you'd call Good Samaritan and you'd call the shelter, and you would try to find a place for somebody, and it was a maze literally, and you couldn't figure out how to do it. So a big positive change that's happened in the last 6, 7 years is that we now know where everybody is. We now know what their needs are primarily for those who are willing to work with our outreach staff. And then we are in a process of navigating people to solutions. Do we have enough resources to put people in the right place? No. But I think I don't want you to leave this meeting feeling frustrated, Councilman Caston, because Goleta, we're the only city that has someone like me in the county, where the city of Goleta has decided to put resources into someone whose job it is to solve these problems. And I'm leveraging resources across the region, across the state and nationally to try to solve the problem for our Goleta residents. So
Well, I mean, I'll follow, let it go, but I want to remind you, I had sent in that suggestion, that idea that we leverage the forthcoming inclusionary housing as an opportunity
yeah,
to put some people into housing. And if we recognize we've got a problem in doing anything with the homeless, unless we have more housing, we've got to look under the couch cushions, so to speak. We've got to look around to where are there opportunities.
absolutely.
Okay,
I'm with you.
good.
Thank you,
Thank
Ellen.
you. I will just leave us on this slide because I think for community members, this is probably the most important thing for you to take away, is that if you want to know where to direct someone, it's going to be here. You're going to want to look at this webpage and say, hey, the nearest one is at the Isla Vista Community Center. It's on this day that we get this time. Can you try and make it there then? That's going to be really the best way to get someone to their first step.
And I would add to that, Landon, that there are churches out there. There are social clubs and groups that, the Rotary, et cetera, who want to know what they can do. Directing people to the right entry point is critical. And in fact, people like Mary, who has a weekly lunch, has people at the lunch who can get people directly into the coordinated entry system. So, and we mentioned showers of blessing. It's actually relatively easy if you're having an event of some kind, if you're doing a food drive, if you're doing a clothing drive, to contact one of these agencies and have somebody come and work with you to get people signed up for coordinated entry. So we have a system now in place that really gives people an opportunity to move forward.
So with
Mary,
that, I
did you
want to,
want to?
go ahead.
There you go.
I was just going to say, I was going to open it up for if there's any questions from the community or just general concerns about homelessness that anyone wanted to raise today. I saw a few new names on the call, so I want to make sure you feel welcome to share. We're glad you're here.
This is Kimber from Communify. Hello, it's been a while, so I'm glad to be back in the space to continue to learn more and partner. I just really wanted to know from me, do we have it? I know I see a few agencies on here that are working with the homeless population in the counseling process. And I might have missed some information prior meetings about the coordination between the two. Exactly how does that process fit into the homeless population, CalAIM, ECM work, et cetera? I know that's a really big, was talking about finding resources, right? I know that is one. Just wanted to see where that falls into the process right now.
Yeah, great question. So for those who aren't familiar, the state of California has implemented this program under Medi-Cal called CalAIM, where they're actually able to direct some funding from Medi-Cal to things that are not typically considered medical support, such as housing navigation and like general care management for people. And so this is only in the last couple of years that this has happened. And so the County of Santa Barbara is trying to integrate this into the coordinated entry system. I believe they're working on some questions that will be a part of this intake that will be related to this so that both of those systems can kind of talk to each other. Because you're right, somebody might be enrolled with a CalAIM case manager on the one hand, and then they get enrolled with a housing case manager through coordinated entry system. And so they are actively working to try and make that integrate better. But we're all aware that everybody's kind of doing both right now.
So Landon said a mouthful this time. So we are moving as a whole system in homelessness towards the notion that healthcare is a solution to homelessness and housing is healthcare. And so SenCal in our region has been incredibly forward thinking in diverting, millions and millions of dollars to particular agencies. I believe Communify is one, to create a system that will enable what Landon's talking about so that we can better coordinate care from medical providers to social service providers to housing providers across the range, the whole continuum of care and how we can do it. And SenCal's right there with us, lockstep, wanting to support this effort. And on the ground, it still can be confusing. I mean, as Landon said, because somebody could have a bunch of different providers. And so the system is, there's a lot of movement, a lot of people talking about how to make this system work better. But the opportunity is huge. All the new housing that's getting created near Goleta and in Goleta is being funded through Housing for a Healthy California. That is Medi-Cal funding. That means that CalAIM clients will be the priority clients for all of this new housing. And so it's a really, I mean, before I was ecstatic about it, now I'm optimistic about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for leveraging healthcare dollars to be able to support our homeless population. And then it's a matter of getting them to see their providers and trust their providers. So many people need dental care. So many people need alcohol and drug treatment, and and basic needs and all kinds of things that the CalAIM money, the SenCal money can support. And I know that all of our people that are on this call, all the providers, are aware of these possibilities. And I think we're moving quickly towards integrating as much of it as we can. I hope that answers your question, Kemba.
Yes, it does. And just to follow up to that, I'm a really big advocate of catching people before they become homeless. So helping them to maintain in their homes, and just always looking for funding opportunities that we can work on to basically keep a family housed with supportive case management before they get to the point. There is a benefit of CalAIM has some aspect of it, but I think it's mostly supporting them after, right? So I'm just always a big proponent of identifying funds for rental assistance and case management supports before they get to the point of homelessness, which is always sometimes, I just definitely am an advocate for preventive services if we can find them as early as possible. So always on the lookout for partnerships and funding to support that.
Well, let's talk more.
Sure.
I can tell you right now what's happening at the county is they have $600,000 that they've directed towards the initiative that you're presenting. So that's funding that would include rental assistance. It's funding that would include counseling and housing navigation. But it also is gauged towards keeping people housed. So my hope is that Communify and Good Samaritan, who runs the county hotline, the solutions hotline, can really work together to support the families that you're talking about. I mean, I definitely have been referring people to that hotline, and we can talk more offline about how that's going with you all.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I did also just want to note on this coordinated entry system page that I've shared the link for, one of the first things on here is the housing problem solving hotline, which is this is before you become homeless. This is if I'm worried I'm going to get evicted, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, whatever it is, call this number. And this goes to Good Samaritan to assist with kind of that prevention question.
And
So
I'm the chair of the Continuum of Care, which is kind of the all hands governing process for homelessness in the county. This idea of problem solving is the top priority for our system. We want to make sure that we are creating opportunities so that people don't become homeless. And so this is really the largest investment that we've made in prevention, the $600,000. But we're aware of programs like in Santa Clara County, where it's gone up to hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to keep people housed so they don't become homeless. So our goal is to grow this program with support of foundation money, with other grants. So when you hear the word prevention or problem solving, those are the key. This is a new initiative. This is where we're really focusing our efforts.
all right, we only have maybe 2 or 3 minutes left. So any other questions or concerns from the community?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and tell your friends about the video say more about where it is, Landon, so that people can watch it.
Yes,
There
it's
you
on our
go.
YouTube channel. Just look up SB Act, but I'll put the link in the chat as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you on
Thanks,
June
everybody.
22nd.
Bye.
Take care.